Howdy, howdy. A few days ago, I was sharing some information about the online Gurukula that I have here in Massachusetts. Well, it's online, so it's everywhere. And it was a friend of mine. We grew up together. We went to Gurukula together. And we were going in this back and forth about what's the purpose of Gurukula. And she was of the opinion that Gurukula has outlived its usefulness. We're no longer in Dvapara Yuga or Treta Yuga. And she, being a Gurukuli herself, she's had some unfortunate experiences, and the Gurukul experiment of ISKCON in the 70s and 80s, and even in the 90s, went in many ways quite wrong. But we had a good discussion, and by the end of it, we came to some understanding, some mutual understanding of each person's opinion on the subject matter. But I thought to share it actually here, so that at least people who hear me talk about Gurukula or may have heard about the Gurukula can certainly understand where I come from in terms of my understanding of the purpose of Gurukula. When we speak of Gurukula, we're not talking about Krishna conscious education. Krishna conscious education is one thing. Gurukula is another. And it's always the famous verse from the Bhagavatam, right? Guru na sasyat, swajano na sasyat, pitha na sasyat, janani na sasyat. Daivam na tatsya na patishcha sasya na mucha yadya samupetya mrityum. If you cannot deliver your dependents from the cycle of birth and death, you should not be a leader in any way, shape, or form. And this goes to being a parent, and certainly in terms of education, the purpose of which is to make sure the students transcend the modes of material nature, transcend samsara. Krishna conscious education within the home or otherwise is perfectly suited to achieve those ends, right? If a child is born in the family of Vaishnavas who maintain a very sattvic, a very Krishna-centered Vaishnav life, then that child has every opportunity to transcend the modes of material nature and at the end of life go back home, back to Godhead. Gurukula is not necessary to achieve those ends, right? So if someone is not, or comes to ISKCON or comes to Krishna consciousness later in life, just because they did not go to Gurukula does not mean they do not purify themselves, become pure devotees, and go back home, back to Godhead. Absolutely not. So then what is the difference between Krishna conscious education, if Krishna conscious education is enough to spur the child onto the transcendental level, and Gurukula? What makes Gurukula unique or special? Unique, different. The purpose of Gurukula, it achieves the same as Krishna conscious education, whether that education is in the home or otherwise, in a more school academic setting. What Gurukula achieves, it achieves that. We're certainly supposed to elevate the living entity, the child, the student, to transcend the modes of material nature and go back home, back to Godhead. It achieves that. But what Gurukula does, in addition to that, goes to a quote that I personally love to use and to keep front and center in my service as a Gurukula teacher, is when Srila Prabhupada says the student goes to Gurukula and they learn qualities, Brahminical qualities, cleanliness, truthfulness, and so on. And then he goes on to say, the best of them are fit to rule the country. That's the difference. Gurukula trains students to come to a level where not only do they themselves transcend the modes of material nature, but they can help others transcend the modes of material nature as well. That's the unique quality of Gurukula. One thing you can say about Gurukula, at least this is how I sometimes share it with others, Gurukula means guru school. It is a school for training and developing gurus. It is an institution, an organization, a mission to develop and train qualified gurus. That's what a Gurukula is for. There's a reason why, traditionally, families or children of the families of Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas were the only ones who went to Gurukula. Because Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas are the only three of the four Varnas that lead others. Shudras don't. Shudras are employees. There's a very, very common misunderstanding, and description of Shudras as somehow being either uneducated, laborers, skilled or unskilled, but basically the masses of society, the groups, the personalities, the individuals of society who really are not specialized, or if they're specialized, are specialized in some very, the crafts or something like that, the arts. Quite the contrary. Shudras are in many ways highly, highly educated, incredibly skilled, but what qualifies them, but why they are Shudras is because they neither want nor do they have the responsibility to lead others. You can have a college professor who is a Shudra. You can also have a college professor who is a Brahmana. And what's the difference? The college professor who is a Shudra, he or she goes to the university, teaches whatever subject matter they're teaching, and then they just go home, work on publishing their book or doing whatever they want to do at home, their own personal research, not caring as to whether or not their students are actually benefiting from what they're learning. The professor is going there to get their paycheck and to go home. There's no sense of personal and individual responsibility for the well-being of all the students, nor does the professor truly care about whether or not the subject matter they are teaching is a benefit to the students and even to the wider world. That's the difference between a Shudra college professor and a Brahmana college professor. A Brahmana college professor is teaching the same subject matter, but the Brahmin takes very, very seriously the responsibility as to how the students use the knowledge he or she is given. That's the difference. A Shudra can, by profession, by vocation, seem as if he or she is performing the profession of a Brahmana. And in fact, we know this because one of the descriptions of a Shudra is that they're actually supposed to support the other three Varnas, right? We know in the Mahabharata, not every person on the battle of Kurukshetra was a Kshatriya. Quite the contrary. The vast majority of soldiers in a Vedic army are actually Shudras. They're professional fighters. The reason why they're not Kshatriyas is because they go to war, they get their paycheck, and they go home. The reason to go to war, the why to go to war, to ensure that war is always based on the principles of dharma, that's what Kshatriyas do. That's what they focus on. The logistics of engaging in warfare, any Shudra can learn how to do that. So the reason why I'm going off into a tangent on the Shudra and Brahminical thing is because we're talking about the difference between Krishna conscious education and Gurukula education. Gurukula education is because those students, as Srila Prabhupada said, are later fit to rule the country. In other words, Gurukul students are the gurus of the next generation. That's the difference. In Krishna conscious education, those individuals, they may go on to become gurus. I'm not saying that those who do not go to Gurukula cannot become gurus. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, as an institution, the Gurukula system is designed to train leaders in society. Vaishnava Gurukula is designed to create, to train, to develop Vaishnav gurus. To look at a Gurukula, there's two categories by which it can be described. One is the academic activities, right? The reading, math, sciences, and so on. The academic subject matters. Then the other department is the ashram department. In a Krishna conscious education, you have the academic department, right? They have to learn the reading, the writing, the arithmetic, geography, algebra to go on to higher university education. Very important, not important, essential, necessary. And then you add Krishna to those academic subject matters, and you teach it with a Krishna conscious theme, right? We know the Harinamamrita Vyakarana. Those who have learned Sanskrit know there are many different Vyakaranas, Sanskrit grammars out there. But Jiva Goswami, I believe, created the Harinamamrita Vyakaran so that Vaishnavas can learn Sanskrit that is Vaishnav themed, right? It's all based on the names, Harinamamrita, right? The glories, the nectar of the holy name is littered throughout the grammar textbooks of Jiva Goswami's Harinamamrita Vyakaran. So in the same way, you can have math, English, science, and so on, but then the devotees make sure it's themed according to Krishna consciousness. So the students, they learn all of their academic, secular subjects, but they learn it in relation to Krishna, Krishna's names, and the theme is Vaishnav, is spiritual in nature. That's not necessarily Gurukula. It's the foundation, and that leads towards transcending the modes of material nature and going back home, back to Godhead, for sure. Gurukul is different. Gurukul has that same academic, how would you say, Vaishnav academic program. But what they also have is the ashram side. And many other times I tell the parents who are part of, whose students are in my Gurukula, I tell the parents the ashram side of the Gurukula is actually the most important side of the Gurukul teaching. Anyone can memorize a shloka. Anyone can memorize the process of doing puja, doing yajna. Anyone can read the stories of the Puranas and learn the stories of the Puranas. It doesn't take great intelligence. Of course, Vaishnava students are brilliant and they learn it very quickly. But it doesn't take great intelligence to succeed intellectually. That can be done by any student. The difficulty or the challenge is the ashram portion of the Gurukula. That's the most important portion of the Gurukula. That is what makes Gurukula unique, is the ashram portion of the Gurukula. The ashram portion of the Gurukula deals with four things: dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Dharma is as it's described, right? Not religion. That's a very limited description or definition of dharma. Dharma means character development. Dharma means, we know the four principles of dharma are tapa, self-control, tapa, saucham, cleanliness, body and mind, tapa, saucham, daya, compassion, and satyam, truthfulness. These four principles of dharma are taught in the ashram department of a Gurukula. Dharma, those four principles of dharma are taught. So they engage in activities from sun up to sundown in principles that inculcate within the students how to live, how to keep the body and mind clean, how to deal in and communicate truthfully, how to practice and live with compassion and empathy, how to tapa, self-mastery, how to have control over the material senses. All dharma, all taught in the ashram portion of the Gurukul training. Dharma artha. In truth, artha, which is sometimes translated as economic development, that's actually where academics are taught. Traditionally, all academic subjects are within artha. Artha means developing the means or the skills to achieve what you want to achieve in life, right? You want to be a lawyer, you go to law school. That's artha. We want to be ISKCON devotees and contribute to ISKCON. So we learn the skills, for example, it's just an example, we learn the skills of what it takes to be a contributing member of ISKCON. Artha, right? Then there is kama. Kama is sometimes described as sense gratification, but in terms of Gurukula education, kama means sense control. Not just chasing after and just letting the senses run rampant, but to actually control the senses. And the entire ashram schedule from morning to night is based on having the ability to control one's senses. Because if you can't control one's senses, everything else, I mean, we all know this, right? Everything else goes to pot. Then in final, dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Moksha means transcending the modes of material nature and going back home, back to Godhead. In the ashram segment of the Gurukul training, from sun up to sundown, it's all about engaging in Krishna conscious activities, always remembering Krishna, never forgetting Krishna, so that we transcend the modes of material nature and go back home, back to Godhead. So dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, those are all taught, developed in the ashram segment of a Gurukula. That's the part of Gurukula that makes Gurukula unique. Because developing students in those four areas, those persons go on to become leaders. So that's the purpose of Gurukula. That's the unique nature of Gurukula. Gurukula, and as if you get nothing else from what I've described here, Gurukula is for training gurus. If you remember that, then you will understand the importance and the uniqueness of Gurukula, how Gurukula is developed, the activities that go on in Gurukula, the importance of the ashram segment. And there's no doubt, I went to Gurukula my entire life. Trust me, I know this, the history of Gurukula. We, ISKCON, we got it horribly wrong. The ashram portion of Gurukula throughout the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. We got it horribly wrong. The thing is, we have to get it right, because that's where qualified gurus come from. They come from that segment of the educational program, the Gurukula segment, the ashram segment of the Gurukula program. This is not and not at all about demeaning a non-Gurukula, a non-ashram Krishna conscious educational program. That is as necessary, even more so, because not everyone is going to be a guru. Not everyone is going to be a leader of society, whether it's ISKCON or greater society. That's not everyone's bailiwick. So it is actually more important to make sure that as the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, we develop numerous Krishna conscious educational programs. But it certainly behooves us that we have numerous, maybe not as many, but certainly make available true Gurukula training. Make it widely available for all families and children who are suitable for it. Because remember, not all children are suitable for it. and I'll end here. What time is it? Yes, I'll end here. I was doing some travel a few years ago. I was driving up and down the East Coast of the United States. It was a wonderful tour. I was visiting all the time. I just had 2 weeks with nothing to do before the pandemic, obviously. And I wanted to visit most, not all, but most of the temples along the eastern seaboard. And I wanted to attend Mangalarti, the morning program of every temple I went to. So I went from New England, I'm in Massachusetts, went down all the way to Florida and back up, and I hit the temples along the way and all the way back up. In one particular temple, I met a Prabhupada disciple who put her child in Gurukula back in the day. And we had a very, very strong, emotional, cathartic conversation about Gurukula for hours. It was after the morning program, and we were, where it doesn't matter, in this particular temple, we were having breakfast, and everyone had left, and she and I got into this, because I went to Gurukula with her son. So we got into this very cathartic, very uplifting, very vulnerable, very painful conversation about Gurukula. One of the things that came up was she was saying that we were told, back she was a Prabhupada disciple back in her day, she said, we were told that we are to give our students, our children, to Gurukula and then just go out and preach. That all kids had to be in Gurukula. And we didn't know, we just did it. That's what we did. That was the thing to do. And I'm sharing that to say this. Yeah, that was the case. That's how I ended up in Gurukula, right? I was sent in Gurukula. My mother was sent on the Sankirtan. That's what was happening. I knew the story. I'm intimately acquainted with that dynamic of ISKCON in the 70s and 80s. But even in the teachings of Srila Prabhupada, when he talks about Gurukula, particularly later on in the 70s, he does describe and say that not all students need Gurukula, right? Not all students will benefit from an intense Gurukula program, the way Prabhupada envisioned it. And we see the results of that. How, first of all, we meaning ISKCON, we not only got or implemented the Gurukula concept completely erroneously in terms of implementation, we also forced square pegs into round holes. Not all students and families are suited to even if the model is correct, not all students and families are suited to Gurukula. The ashram dynamic. Not all students are suited to that. Not all families are suited to that. But those days we got the implementation wrong, and on top of that, we crammed square pegs into a round hole. And the results were less than what was expected. Detrimental, let's be honest about it. So, be that as it may, Krishna conscious educational programs need to be a dime a dozen, because most of our students should be able to avail themselves of a strong Krishna conscious education, because that's going to help them transcend the modes of material nature and go back to Godhead. They're necessary. We don't have enough in ISKCON. And then we should have Gurukulas, because that's where we're going to train the next generation of gurus. That's the phrase to remember when thinking of Gurukula. We always hear these discussions about unqualified gurus. That's your problem. That is your problem. The gurus of the 21st century are going to come out of Gurukula. And I'll leave it at that. Hari Hari.